In this brief video, I'll be introducing different types of biological data which are encountered in introductory biology classes and introductory statistics classes. In particular, we'll be exploring a data set used by Francis Galton and which I'll be using as a sample data set in further lectures. So the key learning objective here is to introduce a couple different types of biological data and to get to know this particular data set so we can know how to work with it. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to identify two different types of common biological data, numeric data and categorical data, and you should also be able to use Galton's height data. So this is a picture here of the actual data sheet Galton used to collect the data, or which his data was transcribed to. And Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, he collected data on variation and heritability in humans. He was a biologist and a statistician, and he was interested in quantifying how humans vary and how they pass on their traits to their children. It's important to note that Francis Galton is a complicated figure because he was a eugenist and a racist, and so despite his great achievements in science and statistics, his legacy is clouded by many other ideas that he carried and propagated. So a driving observation in biology is that offspring resemble their parents. This is a picture here of Bob Marley and his son Ziggy Marley. My kids are really into Bob Marley these days. And just as Bob Marley's sons resemble him, my children resemble me. This is an observation human beings have had since the beginning of time. And so biologists, especially the last 200 years, have been trying to unpack why and how this happens. So Galton was very interested in this, and he collected data. In particular, he collected numeric data on a continuous trait to determine their heritability. In particular, he worked with human heights. So height, we call this a continuous trait. It starts at 0 in theory, usually much more than that, but it varies continuously from low values up to high values, 6 or 7 or perhaps 8 feet in human beings. And it's measured numerically. Sometimes we'd say it's measured quantitatively. Now, a numeric measurement requires some kind of instrument. And in theory, it can be very precise. It often can be measured to decimal points. So when we're talking about a numeric measurement or a quantitative measurement, we're using rulers, calipers, scales to measure these things. This is in contrast to the types of traits, the type of data collected by Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel studied inheritance by collecting data on what we call categorical traits. These are traits or the type of data that are either or discrete. We might call them binary. So he, for example, collected data on seeds, and they were either gray and round or white and wrinkled. Seeds were either yellow or green, white or violet, and so forth. Now, one thing that can be confusing when talking about biological data is sometimes traits, sometimes features of organisms. They could be measured numerically, and perhaps in a different study or a different organism, they would be studied numerically. Like, for example, one thing Mendel investigated was the size of pea plants. However, his pea plants fit nicely into two different categories. They were consistently either short or they were consistently either long, so there was no need to measure them. In Galton's study on the heritability of height, he got families together and he measured the heights of the parents. He measured the height of dad and mom, and then all of their adult children, their sons and their daughters. And then he did further analyses to determine the relationship between the average of the parents' height and their children's height. Whenever working with Galton's data, as we will in future videos, it takes just a little bit of math to work with him because Galton was trying to save space, or maybe the way his instrument was set up made it easiest that everything required adding 60 inches. So when he wrote down 13.2, what he was saying was add 60 to that and give me 73.2. So a measurement of 13.2 is meant to represent 73.2 inches. Just remember that small little thing and you'll know how to work with Galton's data. In future lessons, we'll be talking about different ways to visualize data and analyze data. We'll talk about taking Galton's data and making histograms, making box plots, also calculating error bars, and making things I call error plots. Cover those in future videos in this series.